July 8, 1944, 0630 hours, Hill 112, Normandy, France. Hauptmann Michael Wittmann sat in the commander's cupola of his Tiger I heavy tank, scanning the countryside through his periscope. Behind him, 4 more Tigers from the 1st SS Panzer Corps heavy tank battalion waited in concealed positions. Intelligence reported British armored forces advancing toward the village of Villers-Bocage. Wittmann's orders were simple: stop them. The Tiger I represented the pinnacle of German armored engineering. 56 tons of steel, powered by a Maybach HL230 P45 engine, producing 700 horsepower. The main armament, the legendary 88mm KWK-36L56 gun, could penetrate any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Frontal armor 100 millimeters thick, sloped at angles that increased effective protection to 150 millimeters. Side armor 80 millimeters. Even the rear armor, at 82 millimeters, exceeded the frontal protection of most Allied tanks. Wittmann had absolute confidence in his vehicle. In 2 years of combat on the Eastern Front and now in Normandy, he had personally destroyed 138 enemy tanks and 132 anti-tank guns. The Tiger's superiority was not theoretical, but proven through countless engagements. German doctrine held that a single Tiger was worth 5 Shermans or T-34s. Combat experience validated this assessment. The psychological impact of the Tiger on Allied tankers was immense. When a Tiger appeared, Allied tanks retreated or died. But what Wittmann didn't know, what German high command had failed to adequately assess, what would become devastatingly clear in the coming hours, was that the Tiger's invincibility was an illusion sustained by specific tactical conditions. When those conditions changed, when the Tiger faced enemies who understood its weaknesses and possessed the numbers to exploit them, the mighty predator became vulnerable prey. At 0645 hours, Wittmann observed the British column entering Villers-Bocage. Cromwell cruiser tanks, half-tracks, and support vehicles stretched along the narrow road. The British were advancing in column formation, assuming the area was clear. It was a perfect ambush opportunity. Wittmann ordered his driver forward. The Tiger emerged from concealment, its 88mm gun already trained on the lead British tank. The next 30 minutes would make Wittmann famous. His Tiger and the accompanying 4 vehicles attacked with devastating effect. British tanks caught in column on a narrow road couldn't maneuver or effectively return fire. Wittmann destroyed over 24 vehicles in what would be called the Battle of Villers-Bocage, demonstrating the Tiger's lethality when employed under ideal conditions. Ambush from concealed positions, engagement at ranges where the 88mm gun was invincible, and terrain that prevented enemy maneuver. But by mid-afternoon, the tactical situation had changed. British forces, recovering from the morning shock, deployed anti-tank guns in concealed positions throughout the village. Infantry with PIS projector infantry anti-tank weapons infiltrated close to German positions. Artillery observers called in fire missions. Most critically, British tank destroyers, specifically the 17-pounder gun-equipped Firefly variants of the Sherman, maneuvered to engage from multiple angles. At 1400 hours, Wittmann's Tiger, attempting to withdraw through Villers-Bocage, was struck by multiple rounds nearly simultaneously. The exact sequence remains disputed. Some evidence suggests a Firefly scored the killing blow. Others credit anti-tank gunfire. What is certain is that the supposedly invincible Tiger was knocked out. Wittmann and his crew were killed, and the myth of Tiger invincibility suffered its first major crack. The story of how Germany's most feared weapon became unexpectedly vulnerable reveals the gap between technical superiority and battlefield effectiveness. The Tiger I, entering service in August 1942, embodied German engineering at its finest and most flawed. Every aspect of the design prioritized firepower and protection over reliability and production efficiency. The result was a tank that dominated when everything worked perfectly, but failed catastrophically when any element of the complex system broke down. The technical specifications told the story of both strength and weakness. The Maybach HL230 engine, while powerful, was temperamental. It required high-octane fuel that was increasingly scarce. Oil consumption was enormous, requiring constant monitoring and frequent replenishment. The cooling system was complex and prone to failure. In Russian winter conditions, the engine often refused to start without external heating. In North African heat, it overheated despite multiple cooling fans. The transmission, the Maybach Ulvar OG401216B, represented advanced engineering that proved to be a catastrophic weakness. With 8 forward speeds and 4 reverse, it provided excellent speed control, but was mechanically complex and prone to failure. The gearbox itself weighed over 2,000 pounds and required specialized tools and trained mechanics to repair. When the transmission failed, which happened frequently, the Tiger was immobilized and often had to be destroyed by its crew to prevent capture. The track system created constant problems. The Tiger used two different track widths: narrow transport tracks for rail movement and wider combat tracks for operations. Changing between track types required hours of work by trained crews. The combat tracks, while providing better traction, wore out quickly on paved roads. A Tiger traveling 100 kilometers on roads might wear its tracks beyond usability, requiring replacement that exhausted maintenance capabilities. The interleaved road wheel design, intended to distribute the Tiger's weight more evenly, proved to be a maintenance nightmare. In muddy or winter conditions, dirt and debris would pack between the wheels and freeze overnight. Starting movement required hours of work to clear the wheels, often using blowtorches. If even one wheel needed replacement, the entire side had to be partially disassembled, requiring a day's work that frontline conditions rarely permitted. The statistics of Tiger production revealed Germany's strategic miscalculation. Between August 1942 and August 1944, only 1,354 Tiger Is were produced. Compare this to American production of 49,324 Sherman tanks during the war, or Soviet production of over 57,000 T-34 tanks. The Tiger's technical sophistication came at the cost of numbers that modern warfare demanded. The fuel consumption was catastrophic for a nation desperately short of petroleum. The Tiger consumed approximately 280 liters per 100 kilometers under operational conditions, often more in combat. With a fuel tank capacity of 540 liters, operational range was less than 200 kilometers. In practice, Tigers rarely operated more than 100 kilometers from supply points, severely limiting strategic mobility. The maintenance requirements exceeded what German logistics could sustain. A Tiger required approximately 40 hours of maintenance for every 10 hours of operation. Specialized parts were needed for nearly every repair. Trained mechanics were scarce. The result was that Tiger battalions rarely achieved operational readiness above 60%, often dropping to 40% or lower during sustained operations. The first major engagement that revealed Tiger vulnerability occurred at Kursk in July 1943. Operation Citadel, Germany's last major offensive on the Eastern Front, committed over 100 Tigers to the attack. The concentration of German armor, including the newest heavy tanks, should have achieved breakthrough. Instead, the Soviets demonstrated that the Tiger could be defeated through tactics that exploited its weaknesses. Soviet anti-tank guns, particularly the 85mm units, engaged Tigers at ranges where side armor could be penetrated. Soviet tank destroyers, like the Su-85 and Su-100, used mobility and numbers to attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Most critically, Soviet tactics accepted that destroying a Tiger would cost multiple Soviet tanks, but correctly calculated that the exchange rate was sustainable for the Soviet Union, but not for Germany. Untersturmführer Ernst Barkmann, commanding a Tiger at Kursk, described the experience in his post-war memoir. "We advanced with confidence, knowing our armor and gun were superior. Then the Soviet anti-tank guns opened fire from concealed positions. Rounds struck our side armor, which we thought was invulnerable. 3 Tigers in my company were knocked out in the first hour. We learned that invincibility means nothing when the enemy has enough weapons to fire from every direction simultaneously." The Normandy campaign demonstrated Tiger vulnerability in different ways. The bocage terrain, small fields bordered by thick hedgerows, negated the Tiger's main advantages. Engagement ranges rarely exceeded 400 meters, close enough that Allied tank destroyers and even Shermans could penetrate side and rear armor. The narrow lanes prevented maneuver and often trapped Tigers in positions where they couldn't withdraw without exposing vulnerable aspects. British forces developed specific anti-Tiger tactics based on analysis of knocked-out vehicles. Intelligence reports from July 1944 detailed vulnerabilities. Side armor can be penetrated by 17-pounder guns at ranges up to 1,000 yards. Rear armor is vulnerable to all Allied anti-tank weapons. Track and suspension damage immobilizes the vehicle, making it vulnerable to follow-up attacks. Engine deck armor is only 25 millimeters and can be penetrated by heavy machine gun fire at close range. Recommend infantry close assault with explosives after track damage. American forces in Normandy initially feared the Tiger, but quickly learned its limitations. First Lieutenant Belton Cooper, assigned to 3rd Armored Division Maintenance, documented Tiger engagements. We noticed that Tigers rarely operated alone and were often found abandoned due to mechanical failure rather than battle damage. When we examined knocked out Tigers, we found that side and rear hits had penetrated easily. The frontal armor was indeed formidable, but forcing Tigers to expose their flanks was straightforward given our numerical superiority. The numerical imbalance created tactical situations where Tiger superiority became irrelevant. A typical engagement in Normandy might pit 4 Tigers against 20 to 30 Allied tanks. Even if each Tiger destroyed 3 or 4 opponents, the survivors would flank and destroy the Tigers. German commanders understood this mathematics but had no solution. Building 5 times as many Tigers was impossible. Operating Tigers more conservatively reduced their effectiveness. The tactical problem had no good answer. The reliability issues crippled Tiger effectiveness more than combat losses. Analysis of Tiger battalion records from Normandy showed that on average only 40 to 50% of Tigers were operational at any given time. The remainder were awaiting maintenance, parts, or recovery. Some had been abandoned due to minor damage that couldn't be repaired under field conditions. Others had suffered transmission failures that rendered them immobile. The logistical burden of supporting Tiger operations consumed resources that might have been better allocated elsewhere. Each Tiger battalion required dedicated recovery vehicles, workshops, spare part stocks, and maintenance personnel. The said KFZ-9 FAMO heavy recovery vehicle, specifically designed to tow disabled Tigers, weighed 18 tons and had limited availability. Tigers that broke down outside recovery vehicle range were often destroyed by their crews to prevent capture. If you're fascinated by how German engineering excellence became a strategic liability and how the mighty Tiger tank was defeated by tactics, numbers, and its own complexity, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're uncovering the technical details and battlefield realities that reveal how wars are really won. Don't miss what's coming next. The Battle of Ericourt in September 1944 provided another stark demonstration of Tiger vulnerability. The 5th Panzer Army, equipped with over 100 Panthers and a company of Tigers, counterattacked American forces near the Lorraine town of Ericourt. The Germans expected their superior armor to defeat the American 4th Armored Division. Instead, they suffered a catastrophic defeat that destroyed their armored reserve. The American tanks, primarily M4 Shermans with 75mm and 76mm guns, used superior mobility and coordination to outmaneuver German armor. The Panthers and Tigers, while individually superior in firepower and protection, were defeated through tactics that forced them to expose vulnerable sides and rear. American coordination between tanks, tank destroyers, artillery, and air support created overlapping kill zones where German armor couldn't survive regardless of technical specifications. Oberst Heinrich von Luttwitz, commanding the 47th Panzer Corps, reported to 5th Panzer Army headquarters, "American armored forces demonstrate tactical flexibility that negates our technical advantages. They refuse direct engagement, instead using mobility to attack from multiple directions. Our Tigers destroy individual enemy tanks, but are then flanked and knocked out. The loss-exchange ratio is unacceptable. Recommend withdrawal to defensive positions where our armor advantages can be maximized." The recommendation was rejected. Hitler's orders prohibited voluntary withdrawal. The result was continued combat, where Tigers were steadily attrited through a combination of mechanical failure, tactical defeat, and simple exhaustion of crews and fuel. By the end of September, the German armored force in Lorraine was combat ineffective, having lost over 200 tanks including multiple Tigers, while American losses were quickly replaced. The Eastern Front demonstrated Tiger vulnerability on an even larger scale. Soviet forces, having analyzed captured Tigers and interviewed prisoners, developed systematic anti-Tiger tactics. Forward anti-tank positions would engage to force Tigers to button up and reduce visibility. Artillery would target known Tiger positions with sustained fire, not to penetrate armor, but to damage external equipment and force crews to seek cover. Tank units would maneuver to attack from multiple directions, accepting losses to achieve flank shots. Soviet tank destroyer units specialized in Tiger hunting. The Su-100, mounting a 100mm gun that could penetrate Tiger side armor at 1,000 meters, operated in groups specifically to engage German heavy armor. The crews were trained to identify tigers, estimate range, and aim for specific weak points. The effectiveness of these tactics was demonstrated repeatedly through 1944 and into 1945. Hauptmann Otto Kaurius, one of Germany's most successful tiger commanders with over 150 kills, described the changing tactical situation in his memoir, Tigers in the Mud. By 1944, the Soviets had learned to fight tigers effectively. They no longer panicked at our appearance. Instead, they maneuvered to force us into disadvantageous positions, used artillery to suppress our movement, and attacked in numbers that made our technical superiority irrelevant. Every engagement became a desperate fight for survival, rather than the turkey shoots of 1942 and 43. The mechanical failures that plagued tigers created vulnerability beyond the immediate operational loss. A tiger that threw a track or suffered engine failure became a pillbox, immobile and unable to maneuver. While the gun remained effective, the immobile tiger could be bypassed, bombarded with artillery, or destroyed by infantry assault. German doctrine required recovery or destruction of disabled tigers, but recovery often proved impossible under combat conditions. The recovery process itself revealed tiger design flaws. The vehicle weighed 56 tons, exceeding the capacity of most German recovery equipment. The SDKF Z9 FAMO could tow tigers but only on relatively flat terrain, and at slow speeds, recovery under fire was nearly impossible. The result was that many tigers were destroyed by their own crews when recovery was impossible, contributing to loss rates that exceeded combat losses. The fuel situation became critical during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. Kampfgruppe Piper, the armored spearhead of 6th SS Panzer Army, included multiple Tiger II King Tigers, the even heavier successor to the Tiger I. The operation depended on capturing American fuel supplies, as German logistics couldn't provide sufficient petroleum for sustained operations. The plan failed when American fuel depots were successfully destroyed before capture. Piper's Tigers, running on fumes, began breaking down or running completely dry. The King Tigers, which consumed even more fuel than Tiger I's, were abandoned when fuel exhaustion made movement impossible. American forces advancing through the Ardennes found over 3 dozen German tanks, including several Tigers, abandoned not due to combat damage but simple lack of fuel. Obersturmbannführer Joachim Piper, commanding the Kampfgruppe, later testified about the fuel situation. The Tigers were magnificent fighting vehicles when supplied with fuel, ammunition, and parts. But modern warfare requires more than technical excellence. It requires logistics, sustainability, and operational flexibility. The Tiger was a tactical masterpiece that Germany lacked the resources to employ effectively at strategic scale. We could win individual engagements, but never had enough Tigers or fuel to exploit victories. The production priorities that led Germany to build 1,354 Tigers instead of 4,000 or 5,000 medium tanks represented a strategic miscalculation born from Hitler's obsession with technical superiority. The resources consumed producing each Tiger, approximately 300,000 man-hours, and enormous quantities of scarce materials, could have produced multiple Panzer IVs or assault guns. These lighter vehicles, while individually inferior to Tigers, could be produced in numbers that affected the war's outcome. Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments, argued repeatedly for prioritizing quantity over quality. His proposals to simplify tank designs, standardize components, and increase production of medium tanks were consistently overruled by Hitler, who believed that technical superiority compensated for numerical inferiority. The Tiger embodied this philosophy, taken to its logical extreme, a tank so technically advanced that it couldn't be produced in sufficient numbers or sustained logistically. The combat loss ratios, while initially favorable to Tigers, deteriorated as Allied forces learned to counter them. Early Tiger units on the Eastern Front claimed kill ratios approaching 10 to 1. By 1944, this had dropped to 3 or 4 to 1. In Normandy, particularly after Allied forces learned Tiger vulnerabilities, the ratio often approached 1 to 1, unacceptable for a vehicle that cost 5 times as much and took 10 times as long to build as Allied tanks. The vulnerability of Tiger's side and rear armor proved decisive in most engagements after mid-1944. Allied tankers learned to avoid frontal engagements, instead using mobility to force Tigers to expose flanks. The 76mm gun on later Sherman variants could penetrate Tiger side armor at ranges up to 800 meters. The British 17-pounder could penetrate at over 1,000 meters. Soviet 85mm guns achieved penetration at similar ranges. The tactical implications were clear. Tigers needed to keep all enemies in a narrow frontal arc to remain invulnerable, but battles rarely permitted such ideal positioning. Multiple enemy tanks attacking from different directions forced Tigers to choose which threat to face, exposing vulnerable aspects to others. Once side or rear armor was exposed, penetration was likely, and penetration of a Tiger usually resulted in catastrophic ammunition fires that destroyed the vehicle and killed the crew. The crew survivability in Tigers, while better than most tanks due to the vehicle's size and armor, was compromised by ammunition storage. The Tiger carried 92 88mm rounds stored in the hull and turret. When penetrated, these rounds frequently detonated, causing massive internal explosions. British and American after-action reports noted that knocked-out Tigers often showed signs of catastrophic internal fires, suggesting ammunition explosions following penetration. The psychological impact of Tiger vulnerability on German tankers was severe. Crews who had operated Tigers with confidence in their invincibility became increasingly cautious as losses mounted. The knowledge that Allied tanks were hunting Tigers specifically, that tactics had been developed to exploit Tiger weaknesses, and that numerical superiority meant Tigers would be flanked and destroyed regardless of individual superiority, created combat stress that degraded performance. Lieutenant Hans von Luck, whose unit operated with Tiger support in Normandy, described the changing morale. The Tiger crews in early 1944 were confident, almost arrogant. They knew they possessed the best tank in the world. By August, after weeks of combat in Normandy, that confidence was gone. They understood that every engagement might be their last, that Allied numbers and tactics made survival a matter of luck rather than skill. The psychological transformation from hunter to hunted was devastating. The maintenance burden continued to degrade Tiger effectiveness throughout 1944 and into 1945. Spare parts became increasingly scarce as Allied bombing destroyed production facilities and transportation networks. Mechanics capable of Tiger repairs were killed or transferred. The specialized tools required for Tiger maintenance were lost or destroyed. Battalions that started campaigns with 30 Tigers often finished with fewer than 10 operational vehicles. The final operations in 1945 showed Tigers reduced to largely immobile defensive positions, lacking fuel for maneuver and parts for maintenance. Tigers were dug in as static pillboxes, their mobility sacrificed, but their guns still effective. In this role, they provided defensive firepower but couldn't execute the breakthrough operations they'd been designed for. The transformation from offensive weapon to defensive position symbolized the collapse of German tactical options. Before we explore the final battles and lasting legacy of the Tiger's vulnerabilities, take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. We're bringing you the detailed technical analysis and battlefield accounts that reveal how engineering excellence became strategic failure. Hit that subscribe button to join us for more untold stories from military history. The Battle of Berlin in April 1945 saw the last Tigers committed to combat. Heavy Tank Battalion 503, equipped with King Tigers, defended against Soviet forces attacking from the east. The Tigers, immobilized by lack of fuel and mechanical failures, fought from static positions. Despite achieving high kill ratios, they were eventually overwhelmed by Soviet numerical superiority and destroyed in place when ammunition exhausted. The crews, veterans of 3 or 4 years of combat, understood the futility. They were operating technical masterpieces that couldn't move, couldn't be repaired, and couldn't affect the battle's outcome. The Tiger's final combat role was as expensive roadblocks, buying hours or days but not changing the inevitable result. When crews abandoned their vehicles, they often destroyed them with demolition charges to prevent Soviet capture and study. The post-war analysis of Tiger effectiveness revealed harsh truths. American, British, and Soviet teams studied captured and destroyed Tigers, measuring armor thickness, testing components, and interviewing captured crews. Their reports documented technical excellence in design, paired with strategic failure in employment. The Tiger was a superb vehicle for a different war than the one Germany actually fought. The United States Army's Ballistic Research Laboratory report on Tiger vulnerability, published in 1946, concluded the Tiger I represents the apex of German heavy tank design. Its armor and armament were superior to all Allied tank designs throughout the war. However, mechanical unreliability, excessive fuel consumption, limited production numbers, and vulnerability to flank attacks rendered it ineffective at strategic scale. The Tiger was defeated not through superior Allied tanks, but through Allied numbers, logistics, and tactics that exploited its weaknesses. The Soviet military analysis was more blunt. The Tiger tank embodied fascist ideology, technically sophisticated, wasteful of resources, and ultimately defeated by socialist organization of superior numbers and collective tactics. German obsession with individual vehicle superiority blinded them to the reality that modern war is won by masses, not machines. The British assessment focused on tactical lessons. The Tiger's vulnerability to flank and rear attacks was systematically exploited once understood. Infantry anti-tank weapons, particularly PIATs and bazookas, could disable Tigers by destroying tracks or damaging external equipment. Artillery suppression prevented Tigers from maneuvering effectively. The combination of all arms properly coordinated defeated Tigers, regardless of their individual superiority. The production statistics revealed the resource misallocation. Germany devoted enormous effort to producing 1,354 Tiger Is and 492 King Tigers. The same resources could have produced approximately 6,000 Panzer IV medium tanks or 8,000 assault guns. American. While individually inferior, these vehicles could have been deployed in numbers that affected strategic outcomes. The opportunity cost was even higher when considering alternative uses for scarce materials and skilled labor. The steel, aluminum, and specialized alloys used in Tiger production could have been allocated to fighters, submarines, or synthetic fuel production. The tens of thousands of man-hours spent building each Tiger could have produced multiple trucks, half-tracks, or artillery pieces. The strategic calculus that justified Tiger production assumed that quality would multiply to compensate for quantity. Battlefield results proved this assumption false. The fuel consumption alone should have disqualified the Tiger from production. Germany, desperately short of petroleum throughout the war, built a tank that consumed 280 liters per 100 kilometers. Operating just one Tiger battalion of 45 tanks consumed over 12,000 liters daily, enough to fuel a mechanized infantry regiment. The decision to allocate scarce fuel to vehicles that couldn't decisively affect outcomes represented strategic failure. The psychological impact of Tiger myth versus Tiger reality affected both German and Allied forces. German soldiers and civilians believed the Tiger was invincible, a technological marvel that proved German superiority. When Tigers were destroyed in increasing numbers, when mechanical failures left them scattered across battlefields, when fuel shortages immobilized entire battalions, the gap between myth and reality damaged morale more than straightforward defeats might have. Allied soldiers initially feared Tigers, often over-reporting their presence and capabilities. By late 1944, after systematic exposure had demystified the vehicle, Allied tankers understood Tigers could be defeated through standard tactics. The psychological transformation from fear to confidence paralleled the tactical evolution from Tiger as invincible to Tiger as vulnerable. The crew experience in Tigers reflected this trajectory. Early Tiger crews were elite volunteers, extensively trained and confident in their equipment. By 1945, Tiger crews included conscripts with minimal training, operating vehicles they didn't fully understand and couldn't properly maintain. The decline in crew quality compounded the mechanical and logistical problems, creating a downward spiral of effectiveness. Oberfähnrich Rudolf von Ribbentrop, son of the German foreign minister and Tiger gunner in SS Heavy Tank Battalion 501, described the end. "We knew by early 1945 that the Tiger was no longer decisive. It broke down constantly. We had no spare parts, no fuel, and no hope of meaningful repair. When it did operate, it was magnificent, but that was increasingly rare. We ended the war with Tigers that couldn't move, guns without ammunition, and the knowledge that our technical superiority meant nothing against enemies who could afford to lose 5 tanks for every one of ours and still prevail." The maintenance records told the story in stark statistics. Tiger battalions typically reported only 40 to 50% of vehicles operational at any time. The remainder were awaiting parts that never arrived, suffering from damage that couldn't be repaired, or had been abandoned due to mechanical failure. The gap between authorized strength of 45 Tigers per battalion and actual operational strength of 15 to 20 reflected the impossible burden of maintaining complex machinery under combat conditions. The track life was particularly problematic. Tiger combat tracks lasted approximately 1,500 kilometers under ideal conditions, less in combat. Replacing tracks required specialized tools, trained crews, and hours of work. Frontline conditions rarely permitted proper track maintenance. The result was Tigers with damaged tracks that further stressed transmissions, creating cascading failures that immobilized vehicles. The interleaved road wheel system, while providing excellent weight distribution, was a maintenance disaster. Mud packed between the wheels and froze overnight in Russian winter conditions. Starting movement required heating each wheel with blowtorches, a process taking hours and consuming scarce fuel. If any road wheel was damaged, the entire side assembly had to be disassembled for replacement, requiring a day's work by skilled mechanics. The engine maintenance schedule recommended a complete overhaul every 500 kilometers. In practice, engines often lasted longer, but unpredictably. When engine failure occurred, replacement required specialized equipment, rarely available at frontline units. The Maybach HL230 engine weighed over 1,200 pounds and couldn't be easily removed under field conditions. Tigers with failed engines were often abandoned or destroyed. The transmission failures were catastrophic. The Maybach Olvar unit was mechanically complex, requiring precise adjustment and high-quality lubricants. Under combat stress and maintenance neglect, transmissions failed frequently. When failure occurred, the Tiger was immobile until repair or replacement, both requiring resources that were increasingly unavailable. By late 1944, transmission failure was the leading cause of Tiger non-combat losses. The final accounting of Tiger losses revealed that mechanical and logistical factors caused more permanent losses than enemy action. Of 1,354 Tiger 1s produced, approximately 550 were destroyed in combat, 350 were destroyed by crews to prevent capture, and approximately 450 were abandoned due to mechanical failure or lack of fuel. The remainder were captured intact or surrendered at war's end, often with repairable damage that German logistics couldn't address. The kill-to-loss ratio, while initially impressive, deteriorated steadily. Early Tiger units on the Eastern Front in late 1942 and early 1943 claimed ratios approaching 15-1. By mid-1943 at Kursk, this had dropped to 8-1. In Normandy, during summer 1944, it was 4-1. By early 1945, Tigers were being lost at nearly 1-to-1 ratios, unacceptable for a vehicle requiring such enormous resource investment. The strategic failure of the Tiger program was complete. Germany had devoted vast resources to producing a vehicle that, while individually superior, couldn't affect the war's outcome. The technical excellence that German engineers achieved was real and impressive, but excellence in design couldn't compensate for insufficient numbers, inadequate logistics, poor strategic deployment, and enemies who learned to exploit weaknesses. The lessons learned from Tiger operations influenced post-war tank design globally. American and British designers concluded that reliability and producibility were more important than maximum performance. Soviet designers maintained their focus on simple, robust designs that could be mass-produced. German post-war designers, working for NATO nations, advocated balanced designs that didn't sacrifice operational effectiveness for technical superiority. The myth of Tiger invincibility persisted in popular culture long after the war's end. Films, books, and games portrayed Tigers as nearly unstoppable superweapons. This mythology reflected the psychological impact Tigers had during their brief period of dominance, but ignored the reality of their vulnerability and strategic failure. The actual historical record showed Tigers were defeated routinely once Allied forces understood their weaknesses. The human cost of Tiger operations was significant on both sides. German Tiger crews had lower survival rates than medium tank crews, despite better armor, reflecting the intensity of combat. Tigers attracted, and the catastrophic results when penetration occurred. Allied tankers who faced Tigers suffered high casualties in the learning period before effective countermeasures were developed. The mutual slaughter in tank versus tank combat represented warfare at its most brutal. Germany never expected their mighty Tiger tank to be defeated so easily because they fundamentally misunderstood modern warfare's requirements. They believed that technical superiority at the tactical level would translate to strategic advantage. They assumed that the shock value of an invincible tank would demoralize enemies into defeat. They calculated that elite crews in superior vehicles could defeat numerically superior, but individually inferior opponents. All these assumptions proved false. Technical superiority didn't translate to strategic advantage when production numbers were insufficient and logistics couldn't sustain operations. The shock value of Tigers diminished as Allied forces learned countermeasures and accepted that defeating Tigers required accepting losses. Elite crews in superior vehicles were defeated by adequate crews in adequate vehicles when the latter enjoyed numerical superiority that permitted tactical flexibility. The ease with which Tigers were ultimately defeated reflected not Allied technical superiority but systemic advantages in production, logistics, and tactical adaptation. Tigers that ran out of fuel were easily destroyed. Tigers that suffered mechanical failures were easily destroyed. Tigers that were forced to expose flanks through combined arms tactics were easily destroyed. The supposedly invincible tank proved vulnerable in countless ways that German planners had failed to anticipate. From Hauptmann Michael Wittmann's death at Villers-Bocage in July 1944, when the Tiger Ace was destroyed by forces he had previously dominated, to the final Tigers of Heavy Tank Battalion 503, destroyed in the rubble of Berlin in April 1945, the trajectory was consistent. The Tiger began as invincible, became vulnerable, and ended as obsolete, not through any single technical failure, but through the accumulated weight of logistical impossibility, mechanical unreliability, and tactical adaptation by enemies who learned to exploit its weaknesses. The 56 tons of German engineering excellence, the legendary 88mm gun, the armor that could withstand most frontal hits, all became irrelevant when the Tiger couldn't move for lack of fuel, couldn't fight for lack of ammunition, couldn't maneuver for lack of working transmission, or couldn't survive when attacked from multiple directions by enemies who accepted losses to achieve flank shots. The shock that German commanders felt when Tigers were defeated easily stemmed from their failure to understand that excellence in one dimension, technical performance, couldn't compensate for failures in other dimensions, reliability, producibility, sustainability, and strategic flexibility. The Tiger represented German military thinking at both its best and worst. Innovative engineering applied to solve tactical problems while ignoring strategic realities. The Allied victory over the Tiger was achieved not through building a better tank, but through building adequate tanks in overwhelming numbers, developing tactics that exploited Tiger weaknesses, maintaining logistics that kept Allied tanks running while German tanks sat idle, and accepting that victory required accepting losses that would have been unacceptable to resource-constrained Germany. The mighty Tiger tank, which had seemed invincible in 1942 and 43, was defeated so easily by 1944 and 45 because modern warfare favors systemic advantages over individual superiority. The lesson, paid for in blood and steel across 3 continents, was clear. The most technically advanced weapon is worthless if you can't produce enough of them, keep them running, or employ them under conditions where their advantages matter. Germany never learned this lesson in time to save itself, and the Tiger's defeat became symbolic of a larger strategic failure that doomed the Third Reich.